The smell hit first. Ozone and scorched insulation, the particular stink of a coolant line that had been breathing its guts out for 6 hours straight. Somewhere under the deck plating, a pump cycled and stuttered and cycled again, like a heart with a bad valve. The lights in Bay 9 flickered amber, then held. 312 people were still alive on the transport Kestrel run, and every single one of them was breathing recycled air that was slowly turning into soup. Dale Prewitt lay on his back under a coolant manifold with his forearm buried to the elbow in a nest of wiring, and he was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about a stripped fitting the size of his thumbnail, and how it was the only thing standing between 312 people and a slow, wet suffocation. "Talk to me," said a voice above him. Captain Adiz Okonkwo, arms crossed, boots planted on either side of his legs like she was guarding him from something. Fitting stripped. Somebody torqued it with a power driver instead of a hand wrench, probably in a shipyard in about 40 seconds flat, because time is money and money is God. Dale didn't look up. "I need to sleeve it or we're breathing each other's air until the scrubbers give out, and the scrubbers give out in about 9 hours. Can you fix it?" "I can fix anything that was built by people dumber than me," Dale said, "which, historically, is most people. That was the kind of thing that got you demoted twice in 11 years of fleet service." Dale Prewitt had been a promising propulsion tech once, on track for a shift lead badge, before he'd told a procurement officer to his face that the man's requisition math was the kind of wrong that gets people killed slow instead of fast. He'd been right. He'd also been reassigned to third-shift maintenance on a civilian transport with a crew that called him Prewitt like it was a mild insult, because a man who was right and rude was worse, in fleet culture, than a man who was wrong and polite. He was 39 years old. He had a burn scar across the back of his left hand from a plasma torch that had kicked in 2041, grease under his nails that 3 showers a week couldn't touch, and a jacket with someone else's name stitched over the pocket because his own had never gotten reissued. Nobody on the Kestrel run expected him to matter. He had gone out of his way, in fact, to make sure of it. Mattering got you noticed, and getting noticed got you handed problems that weren't yours. This one was his. He'd made it his the second the alarm went off. He was 3 turns into sleeving the fitting when the ship shuddered, hard enough to crack his head against the manifold housing. "That wasn't the coolant system," Okonkwo said, already keying her comm. "It wasn't. It was a Voss Compact warship, 4 kilometers long, matte black with a hull texture like insect chitin, decelerating out of a slipspace wake directly across the Kestrel run's bow." Dale didn't see it happen. He heard it happen, over the ship's comm, in the voice of a helm officer trying very hard not to sound like he was about to vomit. By the time Dale had crawled out from under the manifold, wiped his hands on a rag that made them dirtier, and made it to a viewport, the Voss ship had already extended a boarding tube and locked it to the Kestrel run's forward airlock like a tick, sinking its head into skin. The ambassador comes aboard. The Voss were not what human media had trained people to expect from an advanced alien civilization. There was no shimmering robe, no benevolent glow. What came through the airlock was 7.5 feet of dense, articulated muscle wrapped in matte armor plates that looked grown rather than manufactured, a jointed exoskeletal ridge running from the crown of its skull down the back of its neck like a row of dorsal fins. Its skin, where it showed at the joints, was the color of wet slate. It moved with the unhurried, economical confidence of something that had never once needed to run from anything. It had 4 attendants behind it, armed, silent, and it had one voice. "I am Ambassador Threlvane of the Second Compact," it said, in a translated voice that came out flat and precise, every consonant landing like a hammer strike. "You will not resist. Resistance would be a waste of your remaining time, which is, biologically, already brief." Captain Okonkwo stepped forward, chin up, hands visibly empty at her sides. "This is a registered civilian transport under Sol Compact treaty protection. You have no legal basis to board. Your Sol Compact Treaty, Threlvane said, was signed with a species the Second Compact no longer regards as a threat worth honoring agreements with. We have reviewed your capabilities. We have reviewed your biology. Your species is obsolete. The alien's ridge flared slightly, the closest thing to an expression its face seemed to offer. Frail respiratory systems, fragile skeletal structure, a P. Ain response so poorly regulated it incapacitates you during combat. You built ships that leak air through a hull seam a Voss child could diagnose in passing. You are not a civilization. You are a temporary arrangement of matter that will end itself through incompetence before we would need to intervene. Nobody on the crew deck said anything. Dale, standing at the back near the corridor hatch with grease still drying on his forearms, found himself doing the thing he always did when someone in authority said something stupid with total confidence, counting the ways it was wrong. A hull seam a Voss child could diagnose. Sure, maybe, but the coolant manifold he just field-sleeved with a fitting he'd fabricated out of a bracket bolt, and 40 seconds of thinking wasn't going to fail again for the rest of the voyage, and no shipyard tech, human or otherwise, was ever going to know it had failed at all. He kept his mouth shut. That was the smart move. He was good at the smart move most days. We are here, Threlvane continued, because your vessel carries a second compact defector and a piece of hardware that does not belong to your species. You will surrender both, and you will surrender them within the hour, or this vessel will be considered forfeit under salvage doctrine, and all souls aboard will be considered incidental. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. We don't have. You have a maintenance technician, Threlvane said, and turned its head, slow and deliberate, until its black, lidless eyes fixed on Dale at the back of the room. Designated Prewitt Dale, formerly of Fleet Propulsion Command, currently classified in your own service record as a discipline problem of limited further use. Dale felt every eye in the room swing toward him like a searchlight. He carries in the housing of his tool kit a drive core fragment recovered 11 days ago from a derelict compact scout vessel, Threlvane said. We have tracked its signature since. He will surrender it now. Dale had, in fact, found a strange lump of warm, faintly humming metal in the wreckage of a derelict 11 days back, while scavenging parts for exactly the fitting he'd just sleeved. He had pocketed it because it was dense and well-machined, and he'd figured he could melt it down for stock later. He had not reported it, because reporting things to Fleet Command had a way of turning into 6-hour depositions that ate into sleep he badly needed. He had, apparently, been carrying a diplomatic incident in his coverall pocket for a week and a half. I don't have a compact defector, Dale said, which was true, and also the only part of the accusation he felt confident enough to argue. Threlvane's ridge flared again, irrelevant to the item's surrender, approach. Ambassador, Okonkwo said, stepping between Dale and the alien with a speed that told him she'd made a decision before she'd finished the sentence. If this is a diplomatic matter, it goes through proper channels. There are no proper channels for obsolete species, Threlvane said, and it did not raise its voice at all, which somehow made it worse. There is only the question of what you surrender and what we take. No way out. The next 20 minutes did not go the way anyone wanted, and by the end of them Dale Prewitt understood, in the specific and unpleasant way you understand a thing when it's happening directly to you, that there was no clean way out of this room. The fragment turned out not to be scrap. It turned out to be a live component of a compact tactical relay, the kind of thing that, in the wrong hands, could be reverse-engineered into a weapon that made the Kestrel Run's entire class of ship look like a bathtub toy. Threlvane wanted it back, badly enough that salvage doctrine had apparently become a euphemism for, we will take your ship apart with you inside it. But Threlvane also, it turned out, could not simply take the fragment by force, not without violating a compact charter clause about unearned seizure. a legal technicality that mattered enormously to a species that prided itself on doctrine and precedent, even while sneering at everyone who wasn't compact. Dale didn't understand the politics. He understood, when Okonkwo pulled him aside in a side corridor, breathing hard, that the ambassador's own attendants had started murmuring something in their own language that made Threlvane's ridge stiffen with what looked, even across species, like irritation. "They can't just take it," Okonkwo said, low and fast. "There's a challenge clause. Compact law. I read the treaty packet twice on the way out here. God knows why. If a compact citizen seizes property from a sapient without cause, the property holder can invoke trial by contest. One combatant each. Whoever wins, the item's ownership is settled. No further claims." "You want me to fight that thing?" Dale said. "I want you to survive the next hour," Okonkwo said. "If you refuse the challenge, why take the fragment, and probably the ship, and probably us with it, dressed up as an unfortunate accident nobody investigates, because nobody wants a war with the compact over 300 civilians. If you accept the challenge and lose, we lose the fragment and maybe you, but the ship and the crew are protected under contest law. No further seizure allowed for a full compact cycle. It's the only clause that buys us anything." Dale looked down at his hands, grease under the nails, a burn scar he didn't remember getting in real time, only in the hospital bed afterward. Not the hands of a fighter, not even close. "I fix pumps," he said. "I don't fight 7-foot murder golems." "I know," Okonkwo said, and for a second her captain's mask slipped and he saw how scared she actually was underneath it. "I know, I'm sorry. There isn't a better option. There's no scenario here where you get to sit this one out." Behind her, down the corridor, Threlvane's voice carried, flat and unbothered, informing the crew deck that the Kestrel run had 40 minutes to comply before salvage doctrine was formally invoked. Dale thought about the 312 people breathing his air, on his ship, because of a fitting he'd sleeved with a bolt and 40 seconds of thinking. He thought about how nobody down here expected him to matter, including, until about 90 seconds ago, himself. "Tell them I accept," he said, "and tell them I want an hour, not 40 minutes. I've got equipment to check." A contest of frailty. The contest arena, such as it was, turned out to be the Kestrel run's forward cargo bay, cleared of crates, its deck plating cold and unpainted under a string of work lights that buzzed faintly at a frequency Dale's back teeth didn't love. The Voss brought their own referee, a smaller attendant with a translator collar who read the terms aloud in a bored monotone. Unarmed engagement. No lethal intervention from either party's crew. Contest ends at yield, unconsciousness, or death. Threlvane's champion was not Threlvane. It was a Voss soldier named Koresh, half a head shorter than the ambassador, but built like something designed by an engineer with a grudge against physics. No visible neck, forearms as thick as Dale's thighs, a face with none of the ambassador's cold formality and all of a predator's patience. Koresh didn't speak to Dale. Koresh looked at him the way you'd look at a task on a checklist. "This will not require effort," Koresh said, to the referee, not to Dale. Dale, standing across the cleared deck in his work coveralls, no armor, no weapon, said nothing at all, because his mouth had gone dry and his hands, when he flexed them, felt like they belonged to someone else. The referee called the start. Koresh closed the distance in under 2 seconds, and Dale learned in the next 3 what a mistake it would be to ever, under any circumstances, let that happen again. A backhand strike he barely got an arm up to deflect sent him sideways into a bulkhead hard enough to crack a rib. He heard it before he felt it, a dry, wet-sounding pop under the noise of the crowd, and the world went white at the edges for a full second before his vision came back online. He rolled, instinct, not strategy. Koresh's boot came down where his skull had been a half-second earlier, and the deck plating dented under it. "Okay," Dale thought distantly from somewhere behind the pane, "so strength's off the table." Noted. He came up onto one knee, ribs screaming, and did the only thing he had ever been good at under pressure. He looked at the system in front of him and started asking what it was made of and what made it fail. Koresh didn't sweat. Dale had clocked that in the first 3 seconds. The Voss soldier's slate-colored skin stayed dry and matte even as he moved, breathing hard through flared nostril slits, heat radiating off him in visible shimmer under the work lights. Voss biology, Dale guessed, ran cooling through some internal system, maybe blood-based, maybe respiratory, but not sweat. Which meant Koresh's body was built to output enormous force in short, devastating bursts, and to overheat doing it, with no fast way to bleed that heat off. Dale, by contrast, was already sweating through his coveralls, and it was the first genuinely good thing that had happened to him all fight. He didn't dodge the next strike so much as let it graze him, and used the momentum to put distance between them, buying 2-3 seconds. Koresh closed again immediately, no patience for a paced fight, and Dale realized with the clarity of a man doing math with his life on the line that Koresh intended to end this in under a minute. Because Koresh's own body was a machine with a thermal limit and Koresh's own instincts, tuned by a species that had never needed to pace itself against something slower and weaker, told him he didn't need to conserve anything against a human. Good, Dale thought, keep thinking that. He spent the next 90 seconds losing on purpose, in the smallest ways he could manage. He let Koresh land 2 glancing blows instead of committing to counters he had no strength to land. He kept moving, kept circling, kept the bigger man working, chasing, striking at air more often than not, and every strike Koresh threw and missed cost him energy his body had no efficient way to shed. The cost was real, and it was Dale's. A forearm block against a strike meant to take his head off left his left arm hanging wrong at the elbow, a hot, grinding wrongness that told him the joint had partially dislocated. He kept moving it anyway, because a dead arm that still moved was more useful than a whole one he was too scared to use. Blood ran warm down the side of his face from a cut over his eyebrow he didn't remember taking, salting his lips, blurring his vision on that side. His ribs ground against each other every time he breathed, and he breathed fast and shallow because slow, deep breaths hurt more. Around the 3rd minute, Koresh's movement started, very slightly to slow. Not much. Not enough for anyone watching who hadn't been counting seconds and staring at the shimmer of heat coming off a body that couldn't sweat. But Dale saw it, in the half-beat of hesitation before the next strike, in the way Koresh's flared nostrils worked harder for the same amount of air. "You tire," Koresh said between breaths, and it wasn't a taunt. Dale realized it was confusion, a statement of fact that didn't match Koresh's model of the universe. "You bleed. You should already have yielded." "Working on it," Dale said, through a mouthful of copper and didn't yield. He kept circling. He kept the bigger man moving under work lights in a sealed cargo bay with recycled air and no ventilation to speak of, because Dale had spent that first frantic minute doing more than surviving. He'd been reading the room the way he read every broken system he'd ever knelt in front of, and he'd clocked, in the corner of his eye, the environmental control panel bolted to the bulkhead 8 meters to his left, the one he'd personally serviced 2 weeks back. The one whose manual override he could operate blind, with his eyes closed, with one dislocated arm, because he had rebuilt its logic board with his own hands. He just needed to survive long enough to get to it. The turn. Koresh caught him at the 4th minute, a solid hit to the already broken ribs that put Dale flat on the deck, the world narrowing to a ringing tunnel and the taste of blood, and the distant sound of Okonkwo shouting something he couldn't parse. He didn't black out, but he came close enough to feel the edge of it, a soft gray pull at the corners of everything. He got an elbow under himself, then a hand. Then, moving like a man twice his real age, he got a knee under himself and stood. The cargo bay went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Koresh had stopped advancing. The Voss soldier stood 4 meters off, chest heaving, heat shimmer thick enough now to blur the air above his shoulders, and he was looking at Dale, really looking, not the checklist glance from the start of the fight, with an expression that, on a human face, would have been the beginning of alarm. "You should not be standing," Koresh said. "Yeah, well," Dale said, and spat blood onto the deck plating. "Nobody told my legs that." He didn't wait for a response. He turned, every rib in his chest screaming at the motion, and half ran, half staggered the 8 meters to the environmental panel, his good hand already flipping the housing latch he'd installed himself, his fingers finding the manual override switch by feel because his left eye had swollen half shut, and he needed them too. Koresh came after him, furious now, the patience gone, and that fury was the last mistake he made in the fight. A body running hot, sprinting through air it could not efficiently cool, chasing a target that had just done something it did not understand. Dale hit the override. The cargo bay's environmental system, which he had personally rebuilt from a fault 2 weeks prior, which he alone in the entire crew knew the true tolerances of, dumped every erg of thermal load it had been quietly bleeding off the Kestrel Run's overworked coolant system straight into the compartment atmosphere. Not as cold air, but as a sudden, brutal spike, a superheated blast of recycled thermal waste that had nowhere else to vent. Aimed squarely down the length of the bay Koresh was charging through. For a human, it would have been a bad afternoon. Sweat glands doing exactly what sweat glands were built to do. For a Voss soldier already running at the ragged edge of his own thermal ceiling, with no evaporative cooling system to fall back on, it was catastrophic. Koresh's charge broke mid-stride. He staggered, one hand going to the exoskeletal ridge at his neck as though he could physically vent heat through it, his massive frame swaying like a felled tree, deciding which way to go down. Dale, gasping, bleeding, one arm hanging wrong, did not hit him. He didn't have the strength left to hit anyone, and he knew it. He didn't need to. Koresh went down to one knee on the scorched deck plating, breathing in ragged heaves, and after a long, silent moment, he did something Dale hadn't expected and wasn't sure the rules even covered. He set his own forearm guard, the closest thing he carried to a weapon, down on the deck in front of him, and bowed his head, exposing the unarmored ridge at the base of his skull, the most vulnerable point on a Voss body, to a man who could no longer have reached it if he'd tried. "Yield," Koresh said, voice thick with something that wasn't quite defeat and wasn't quite respect yet, but was clearly on the road to becoming one of them. "The contest is yours." The referee, tonelessly, confirmed it into the record. A bigger problem. Dale didn't get more than 90 seconds to sit on the deck and shake before Threlvane's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, and it had lost every trace of its earlier cold amusement. "This changes nothing regarding the fragment's danger," the ambassador said, striding forward past its own kneeling soldier without so much as a glance down at him. "But it changes everything regarding my authority to act unilaterally. I am recalled to explain myself. That is inconvenient because we are no longer alone out here." Threlvane's attendants had gone rigid, heads tilted toward handheld consoles that had started chirping in an urgent, layered pattern. Okonkwo was already at Dale's side, hauling his good arm over her shoulders, when she caught the tail end of what the attendants were murmuring to each other, and her face went carefully blank in the way command faces do right before they deliver very bad news. "There's a second signature inbound," she said. "Big one, not compact." "There is a rogue faction within my own government," Threlvane said, and for the first time it sounded less like a sneering ambassador and more like a very tired diplomat who had badly misjudged the size of the fire he was standing in. "They believe the fragment your technician carries can be weaponized against the Compact's own council. They have been tracking its signature as closely as I have. More closely, apparently." It turned toward the viewport, where a new shape was resolving out of the black, smaller than Threlvane's own vessel, faster, bristling with weapon ports that had no diplomatic pretense to them at all. "They are not bound by challenge law. They are not bound by anything. If they board this vessel, everyone aboard it, human and Voss alike, is an acceptable loss. Great, Dale said, through swollen lips, testing his dislocated shoulder with a wince. Love a second boss fight. Nobody's ever done that before. Okonkwo didn't laugh. Ambassador, you're telling us your own people are about to attack a civilian ship to get a piece of hardware, and the only reason you're not helping is a legal technicality about who currently owns it. I am telling you, Threlvane said, that ownership under contest law is now formally the technician's, which means the fragment is under his vessel's sovereign protection, which means my forces are obligated to defend it against unlawful seizure by anyone, including my own government's rogue elements, or the Compact's own charter becomes meaningless. It paused, and its ridge did something complicated that Dale, 3 fights and 1 dislocation into his day, no longer had the energy to interpret. This is, I will admit, an inconvenient consequence of my earlier assessment of your species. You mean us being obsolete, Dale said. I mean, Threlvane said, with what might in a Voss have been the beginning of reluctant honesty, that I did not account for the possibility that a species without our strength might have developed other advantages instead. I am recalculating. The rogue vessel's weapon ports were charging. Dale could see the telltale heat bloom of it even through the viewport, a dull orange stutter along its hull. He didn't have long to recalculate anything. How long till they're in range? He asked. 4 minutes, Okonkwo said, maybe less. Dale looked down at his ruined coveralls, his dislocated arm, the blood drying tacky on the side of his face, and thought, not for the first time in his life, that the universe had an extremely poor sense of timing. Get me to engineering, he said. I've got an idea and it's going to sound insane, and I need you to trust me anyway. The trap. The idea was, by Dale's own admission, insane, and it hinged entirely on the fact that he had spent the last 11 days quietly nursing a coolant system that was one stripped fitting away from catastrophic failure, and on the fact that nobody outside the Kestrel Run's maintenance crew, least of all a rogue Voss attack squad running off intercepted sends, or data, would know that. Their scans are reading our coolant system as failing, he said, half shouting over the noise of engineering as he shoved a fresh sleeve onto the same manifold he'd fixed hours earlier, his one good hand working fast, his bad arm strapped tight to his chest by a medic who'd given up telling him to sit still. They think we're one bad jolt from venting atmosphere. That's not wrong, it's just old data. I fixed it. But if I unfix it on purpose, in a very specific way, right as they board. You want to fake a hull breach, Okonkwo said. I want to fake a hull breach in exactly the compartment their boarding tube is going to lock onto, because that's the only accessible airlock left on this side of the ship after their ambassadors, people parked their tube on the forward one. Dale twisted the last fitting home, sweat stinging the cut over his eye. Voss biology doesn't do well with rapid decompression. None of ours does, but theirs is worse, bigger surface area. That internal cooling system runs on pressurized fluid loops that I'd bet good money aren't rated for a fast drop. I flood the boarding compartment with superheated coolant vapor the second their tube seals, then vent it hard into vacuum the second they're inside and committed. It won't kill them if they're fast. It will absolutely put every one of them on the deck gasping, and it'll buy us the 90 seconds we need to seal the compartment behind them and hold them there without a shot fired. And if you're wrong about their biology, then I'm wrong, and we're all in trouble regardless, because that ship's about to open fire on a transport full of civilians in about 90 seconds anyway, Dale said. I'd rather be wrong trying something than right doing nothing. Threlvane, who had followed them down into engineering with 2 of its remaining attendants, made a sound that Dale's translator earpiece rendered as something between a laugh and a cough. You intend to defeat an assault force with thermodynamics. I intend to defeat an assault force with a fitting I already know is weak, a manifold I already know how to blow, And physics I didn't invent but I'm happy to abuse, Dale said. You got a better idea, Ambassador, I'm all ears. Otherwise get your people clear of that airlock corridor, because it's about to get very hot and then very cold very fast. Threlvane looked at him for a long moment, bloodied, one arm strapped down, standing in a puddle of his own sweat and somebody else's coolant, giving orders in a compartment full of people twice his mass, and did not sneer. Do it, the ambassador said. 90 seconds. The rogue vessel's boarding tube locked onto the Kestrel Run's secondary airlock with a clang. Dale felt through the deck plating 3 compartments away, where he crouched at a systems panel with Okonkwo covering the corridor behind him, and a medic hissing at him to keep his strapped arms still. He didn't have the luxury of watching it happen. He had the luxury of a status readout and 40 seconds to get the sequence exactly right. He flooded the boarding compartment first, vented raw superheated coolant vapor from the manifold he'd deliberately left half-sleeved, filling the sealed airlock antechamber with a fog thick enough that the rogue squad's own sensors would read it as exactly what it looked like. Catastrophic system failure, a ship dying around them. He heard, over the corridor's emergency comm relay, the muffled sound of alien voices shouting orders in a language his earpiece hadn't been fed a translation matrix for, sharp and fast, and afraid in a way Threlvane's cold diplomatic register had never once sounded. He gave it 11 seconds, long enough for the squad to be fully inside, fully committed, disoriented in the fog. Then he blew the antechamber's outer relief valve. The pressure differential did the rest. Superheated vapor met hard vacuum, and the compartment cleared itself in under 2 seconds, a violent outward rush that Dale had rigged, with his one good hand and a length of salvaged cable, to trip the emergency bulkhead seal on a half-second delay. Just long enough for the vapor to vent, just short enough that nothing inside the compartment had time to brace, get organized, or get out. The bulkhead slammed shut. On the far side of it, 8 Voss soldiers who had, 90 seconds earlier, been an unstoppable boarding force, were now sealed in a compartment with a rapidly dropping temperature, a rapidly dropping pressure, and internal cooling systems that Dale had gambled, correctly, it turned out, were never designed to survive a shock like that intact. Nobody died. That mattered to Dale more than he expected it to in the moment the readouts confirmed it. 8 life signs all present, all in what his translated medical readout called acute distress. None of them flatlined. He'd built a trap, not an execution, and some part of him that had spent 11 years getting demoted for caring too much about the math of who lived and who didn't was quietly, fiercely glad he'd gotten the numbers right. The rogue vessel outside, watching its boarding squad go dark on its own sensors, and its target ship apparently venting atmosphere into a death spiral that had, in fact, already stopped, did the thing every predator does when a meal turns out to have teeth. It hesitated. And in the 2 minutes that hesitation bought, Threlvane, restored, by contest law, to full and furious diplomatic authority, the second its own rogue faction had committed an act of unlawful boarding against a vessel under compact-recognized sovereign protection, got a priority channel open to a compact enforcement cruiser holding position 4 systems away, and read the rogue vessel's registry numbers into the record. The rogue ship broke off and fled into slipspace 11 minutes later, with a compact enforcement flag now permanently attached to its transponder history. It did not come back. After Dale woke up in the Kestrel Run's tiny medbay 8 hours later with his shoulders set, 3 ribs strapped, a butterfly closure over his eyebrow, and Captain Okonkwo sitting in the chair beside his bed like she'd been there a while. "You're an idiot," she said by way of greeting. "Yeah," Dale said. His voice came out like gravel. "Heard that one before." "You're also apparently the reason we're all still breathing," she said. "Ambassador Threlvane wants to speak with you, formally, on the record. I think it's going to be uncomfortable for him." It was a little. Threlvane stood at the foot of Dale's medbay bed an hour later, minus its two attendants, with Koresh, upright now, a heavy bandage wrapped around one forearm, standing a respectful half-step behind the ambassador's shoulder, and it took the alien a long moment to find the words it wanted. "I called your species obsolete," Threlvane said finally. "I was measuring the wrong things." "Yeah, well," Dale said, shifting against the pillows, wincing as his ribs reminded him they existed. "You're not the first alien empire to skip the fine print. I'd tell you what I actually am, but I don't think demoted maintenance tech with a chip on his shoulder translates real clean into whatever language you people write your treaties in." "It translates adequately," Threlvane said, and there was, unmistakably now, something like dry amusement in the flat cadence of the translated voice. "The Compact Council will be reviewing our species' assumptions regarding humanity. I expect this will take some years. Bureaucracies are, in this respect, a universal constant." "Good," Dale said. "Take your time. Just don't send anybody else to sneer at my coolant system in the meantime. I only just got it fixed." Koresh, silent until then, inclined his head, not a bow, not quite, but close enough that Okonkwo, watching from the doorway, made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "You fought with intelligence, not strength," Koresh said. "This was not what I was trained to expect. I will remember it." "Remember this too," Dale said, closing his eyes, already half asleep from whatever the medic had put in his IV line. "I want hazard pay and a sandwich, in that order. Galaxy can wait for both." If you liked watching a man with a dislocated shoulder outthink an entire alien boarding party using nothing but sweat, thermodynamics, and sheer stubbornness, hit like and subscribe for more stories where humanity wins the hard way. Drop a comment telling me what you think Dale should demand as hazard pay for saving 300 civilians and an ambassador's entire worldview. And share this one with the person in your life who always roots for the underdog with a wrench in his hand. See you in the next one.